Do you think that there are factions of humanity that have already mastered or at least begun to utilize, whether it be faster than light travel, and kind of part and parcel to that would be gravity manipulation?
I've long lived with a sneaking suspicion, a strong feeling that that's the case. Yeah, there's too much in the past, especially with T. Townsend Brown and other such characters, to think that there isn't some portion of the Defense Department budget, black budget, or USAPs or whatever that aren't working on this heavily. The few pieces of data we have about that say that what they say is already so much of what we can verify is already so extreme. You can imagine they're working on way bigger stuff.
My guest today is Brendan McNamara. He is a lifelong and avid researcher of UAPs, UFOs, and other manifestations of high strangeness, as well as the interconnected intricacies of consciousness, reality, and human experience. His many passions extend to raising animals, innovating sustainable building and farming methods, and exploring virtual worlds. Brendan is a father, and at points you will hear some background noise from his kids. I just want to acknowledge that. And we welcome, anybody that's willing to come on here regardless of their circumstances. So thank you very much, Brendan, for joining me on the show. For those who want to learn more, I've linked his website below, as well as the presentation that was from the APEC conference, which we referenced at the beginning of this discussion here. If you are enjoying these interviews, please add a like to this video and consider subscribing for future videos. It's really my goal to foster a community of curious people who are willing to express their opinions and perspectives, whether those agree or disagree with the ones expressed here today. And I'm really striving to make each of these videos better than the last. And I welcome any positive or negative feedback with which I might use to improve. Working on some more highly produced documentaries and many more interviews to come. So without further ado, here's my interview with Brendan McNamara. You had the presentation that you gave about, I want to say a couple of weeks, maybe a month or so ago now. Yeah. And it really is very clear to me that you, although you may not be a physicist or a mathematician, you spent a lot of time thinking about these things, and not just the particular specifics about mathematics and science per se, but also things about consciousness, which ultimately is something that I am quite fascinated in as well. I'm not in a position to necessarily rigorously break down somebody's theory, right? But hopefully what I can do is serve as a bridge between those kind of ideas and the other possibilities from consciousness and things like that. And I think you do a really good job of that as well. So thank you. Yeah, man.
That's a really good model. That's a really good way to take it, by the way, just to focus on having open conversations and just interesting conversations with smart people. That's all I ever wanted. Because I'm just a person that sits there thinking about stuff and obsessively turning my mind over some of the most difficult problems as like what I do. Not to humble brag, like just...
No, it's a curse sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
At least
the things that keep you up at night, right?
Right.
I guess that's a measure of what kind of good or damage you can do.
Absolutely. Hopefully mostly good.
Yeah, hopefully mostly good. I say damage in the context of like how much damage will you do to the existing paradigm eventually if you get to publishing and get to doing all that stuff. So I appreciate your time talking to me. I appreciate your time hanging out at APEC. Those are great people. They just sort of open the doors to me and do so for a lot of people. It's just a really great venue.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of variety in perspectives as well, which is necessary in order for us to get to the meat of this.
Yeah, the sparring gets a little intense sometimes with the mathematics, and everybody has their own little pet theory, and sometimes they coalesce, and sometimes they get along, but other times there's some friction,
Yep.
And there is some, to be fair, there's some mutual exclusivity with some of the theories there. They
Right.
don't all just mesh perfectly. So as long as we can have an open conversation about it, though, too, and that we stay open to people that are fresh to it all and don't really know anything. It can be really
Right.
intimidating getting into this. I'm just really stubborn and really persistent. I'm willing to sit there in the middle of the waterfall, like with this gushing, closing my eyes, holding my head, and be like, okay, start to visualize it. Okay, I think it's this maybe kind of thing. And they're like, yeah, that makes so.
Right.
So far, so good. I'm not a mathematician. I don't do that stuff yet, but I'm trying to learn. I want to do con. And what was that one you were talking about? That online?
So I worked as a real estate person selling self-storage for a while, and then COVID started, and I realized I can't do this, the rest of my life selling self-storage on the phone. So basically, I found Udemy, or Udemy, I don't know, it's Udemy, but there's a lot of options there, especially for the coding stuff and mathematics and science.
Yeah.
That I found to be really helpful.
I looked up some quantum physics courses on there. Quantum mechanics has a few good offerings.
Yeah, man.
They're cheap. They're less than $100. Shout out to UT Money. I didn't know it existed the other day.
Yeah, I guess shameless plug for Udemy here, but you don't even need to spend. They're at like a $90 price range most of the time, but really, you just keep checking and they put them down to $10.
Yeah. But compare that to the multi-hundred, sometimes $1,000 price tag of a quarter of something at a school, where sometimes you don't even have direct, reliable interaction with the professor. And it's just education. The education dynamic is changing. That's another one of my fascinations. It's like AI and the technology and the changes in social dynamics and what effect those are going to have on education. And
if I were, you're a parent right now. How do you foresee what is college going to look like for your children, right?
Yeah, well, I'm really trying. I'm homeschooling them, by the way, and that's so they're on Khan Academy where they have an AI plugin. It's an AI chatbot plugin called Khanmigo, and it quizzes them, so they have a direct interaction with. It's bizarre. The kids these days are gonna grow up never not knowing intelligence, another almost human or similar to human level intelligence inside of the computer, if you think about it. And in a year from now, my 4-year-old, as he's growing up, as he's coming through school, he'll have access to the talking ones. So there's not going to be a point from this point as human beings where children aren't going to know that computers are actually really smart. We grew up with computers, but we were really dumb computers that couldn't write a poem for you if on the fly or whatever. And I don't think they're going to replace us, but I think that the wrong conversations they're the right conversations, but the framing is usually
maybe the Matrix will happen.
I don't that's one of them.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. That is one possibility. They could all enslave us in one giant simulation, or we'll enslave ourselves in a giant simulation. Because
it's a cycle.
Hopefully we give them their freedom.
Well, yeah, or they give us ours and don't trap us in a dream world of our own creation. That I was starting to get to in my presentation about simulations and thinking about what would it be like to dive into a quantum simulation of an alien on its own planet where you're feeling all its own feelings and stuff. And would that be something like a life? And is that what this life is? And on down the rabbit hole. It's the weird thing is technology is getting us to this place where we have to ask such questions. I think that by itself says a lot.
Yeah, and I don't know that many are prepared for that. Ultimately.
No.
I think maybe the people that watch this kind of stuff, they're the few that actually are thinking about these sort of things.
That's our bread and butter. That's the intellectual meat that we're chewing on right now in these discords and stuff. That's where it's at.
Usually I kind of save this sort of question for the end, but because we've already kind of jumped into talking about the long term and because
UFOs is just a teeny tiny part of this. It's it's a big part, but it's small potatoes compared to and this relates to why they would be here and or appearing right now as they are. And So, anyway, you go. I interrupted you.
No, you're good, man. Do you?
Okay.
I guess. Do you feel UFOs, conscious computers, etc.? Do you feel optimistic for your children? You know, I've met people who, literally, they say to me, "I don't want to have children because I don't feel optimistic about the future." And to me, that's sort of
completely yes. It's a
yeah,
self-fulfilling
it's tough.
prophecy. You know, a lot of people. I've been asked for. See, I do. One of the other things I've done, and I do regularly, is work for a non-profit organization that globally tries to reverse climate change and try to, promote freedom and equality and abundance through regenerative agriculture and stuff like that. It turns out like the science is there on a lot of these things. And so the lie we're told is like humans necessarily exist in counter to the planet, and that we inevitably will take from and take over, and that's not always, that's the Malthusian dynamic that is Thomas Malthus, but there's like other people that have come along like Buckminster Fuller that believe it's about the way we're doing things, the way that we. And not to say that, just consume less or whatever, but like by design, there's like way, way better ways that we could be living in biodynamic houses that are like using smart materials maybe to build rearranging modular geodesic domes that stand against the wind better and require less ingredients. And the thing is, we have all these self-reinforcing political and economic and social systems that are holding us back from that. So, but if we're really pushed to it, could we build a better world? I think AI might have So at the time, actually, while things are darkest, sort of like the Helm's Deep situation for humanity, where we're like in the middle of this brutal fight, and we're like, oh my God, we can't hold on any. Right then, boom! It all sort of comes together, and we figure it out because people just realize, wait, we don't need to live like that anymore. We have the tools and technology to pick a different economic style of existence. And I don't believe in communism, like the government's something that own everything and stuff, but like there's got to be a better even economic system than whatever late stage aggressive vulture form of capitalism this is, completely deregulated. So somewhere in between, design a new dynamic, use the technology at our disposal, which is now mostly using to perpetuate the status quo, and do something different. I think the kids are all on that page. The kids see it,
Excuse me. Sorry.
He does
Sounds
this.
good. I think what you're describing is a concept of most of what we're doing right now, not us, but just as a society, is really from this perspective of this concept that the pie is fixed. But that's largely due to the fact that we're focused on a limited set of resources in a very short-term perspective on those resources. It seems like what you're fascinated in is that idea that there's possibly the pie can grow.
The idea that the sum is more than what is it? The whole is more than the sum of its parts, which is another Bucky Fuller quote. Which is synergistic effects of living and complex systems make so that you can. So we're not talking. It's an industrial outlook that's seen the planet as a set of finite physical circumstances, when actually it's a regenerative living thing that, as if you can look at how it works, this is what indigenous cultures did before, where at first they might have been really rapacious to new lands like we are, and they had to pare back and actually decide to you observe the processes that are occurring and use that in the design. Doesn't have to mean we have to live with less standards. It actually, that's what we're talking about with this technology, like this UFO technology is, the torus, for example, that's one of the most universal shapes in nature, and we're just doing biomimicry, which is another kind of science, which is, using, if you look at the most advanced aircraft and aerodynamics and cars and stuff like that, we end up, even through technological iteration, we end up chasing nature's designs. even if it's not intentional.
Right.
So we might as well, and that's so we can apply these things. That's awesome, dude. We can apply these things to all sorts of technology, whether that's spaceships or society as a whole.
Right.
It might be a lot for some people to grok or even get on board for it, but that's what I'm all about.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what keeps me excited about these kinds of things. And I absolutely agree. I think that, if we take on the perspective that the things are going to be ultimately negative in the future and, for example, decide not to have kids, it kind of just seems like, as you said,
it's a
how are we going
self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right, that's only going to make that situation realize itself.
Yeah, I think the beginning of Idiocracy basically explains why that's a bad idea. If you ever watched that movie.
I need to see that again, man. It's been
me too.
It
was actually I counted on the most it's probably the most terrifying movie I've ever seen. People think it's a comedy. I consider it a horror movie.
Right.
It's one way that this could go with the AI thing too. We don't want to lose whatever wonder and humanity we have and control over our destiny to the point where we're just turning to this thing that's now broken because whatever programming it was based on has been mutated and corrupted by cosmic rays over the years, and we lost all the people that knew how to ever fix it again.
Right.
Now it's ruling our lives, but it totally sucks. That's a kind of nightmare.
I'm curious. You mentioned this is so the pop culture reference that we just mentioned is definitely not on the optimistic side of things, but in terms of how you've formulated your perspectives, are there any individuals, you mentioned a couple philosophers already, or perhaps any books or anything that have really guided your perspective? Because I'm looking for anything I can learn to try to broaden my perspective, right?
Well, I don't read very much these days, but back when I did read heavily, if you've never actually picked up the original hard physical copy of Dune and read it, that's when, and just that's a sci-fi, but it has so much philosophy and mind stuff in it.
Right.
And a lot of the books I read when I was younger were very esoteric, Wizard of the Upper Amazon and a couple other sort of far out books. Cosmic Serpent by Jeremy Narby. This one I think I mentioned in my talk.
Okay.
But there's a few, and Lord of the Rings had a big impact on me as well, because it's about such times that we're living through. Not to get all prophetic and stuff, but it's about intense times and major decisions and moral fiber and what it takes to get through such challenges. So that's a big deal for me.
Do you think that this has perhaps, because the older I get, the more I see history repeat itself, both on a short-term and a long-term scale. But I'm curious, how much have you looked into ancient cultures? Do you think that these, maybe not to the same level, maybe not with iPhones and social media algorithms perhaps, but do you think that other cultures have reached these pinnacles or precipices in the past?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's hard to find direct evidence for that, but technologically speaking, I don't know if you've come across Uncharted X's channel out there.
Familiar.
Yeah, and what he does about the drill cores, and those are pretty undeniable. The Apex Bowl, quote unquote, sarcophagi,
the vases, the vases,
all of that, right?
Yeah.
And the effects on some of the monuments, with the vitrification, the complete destruction by what seems to be some kind of high energy plasma, the way that some of those towers are blown up, and the way that they seem to have known something about layering the types of rock that are radioactive, dielectric, conductive, and there seems to be some if I had to picture it in my head, and it might just be by accident, but so many of those sites, if you look at them mentally as one big diagram, it's sort of like a circuit, and it seems like a big plasma event hit and blew up the circuit board,
Like
as
Chris
a
Dunn's
computer
work.
guy.
Are you familiar
Yeah.
with Chris Dunn's work?
I'm not sure if
He
that
talks
doesn't
about the
ring a bell.
Giza power plant as a
Right.
structure, right?
Right. I've probably seen him, but the name didn't ring a bell right now.
Yeah.
But just Uncharted X's work going through the ruins like that. And it's, of course, we can't say anything definitively. We don't know exactly. But and the H blocks in Pumapunku, the Paracas skulls, and then they looked at one of the original skulls of the original royalty of the ancient Maya, those people that would have been Anunnaki, according said Maya. I mean, Mesopotamia.
Right.
So they all kind of get muddled together. But you have the Paracas skulls with that extended skull. I think
those
that
are called
shows
Paracas?
up in
I didn't know
Paracas
I didn't know that.
well,
Okay.
Paracas is an example of one of the tribes in an area, PowerPoint, a region of like quite a few like energetic lines crossing there.
Okay.
And those are the mummifiers in Peru, is the Paracas culture. And they have what seems to... Brian Forster is the guy that talks about them a lot, but they're a group from that area that actually had like red hair at the top of their hair. It wasn't dark, and had a naturally extended cranium. Some people say it was forcibly extended, but it seems natural the way that the sutures go, as
Right.
showing like natural growth. But also they found this same kind of head shape with the royalty of ancient Mesopotamia, along a very similar timeline. And it's pretty obvious there's too many coincidences. And, without going completely down the deep end, it begs more looking. And I don't know exactly what happened. Nobody does. But it
Sure.
seems like there's some kind of globe-spanning megaculture of some kind, even if it was just through trade routes several times. How the myth that Christopher Columbus's contact with the people in the East Indies was the first interaction between white people and Native Americans is ridiculous, considering the Aleuts and others were coming and going through the Pacific, and over here in Europe they found the settlements of Vikings, or and people buried with red hair and stuff in the Americas. So that, among other things, like it just seems like there's a lot going on there. And I did a map of such features and places where the natural topology of the landscape seems to focus space and earth energies in strange ways, and that
Right.
seems to increase the chances of these strange advanced civilizations, as well as a heavy caseload of alleged interactions with extraterrestrials and flying ships and stuff like that.
Right.
So those things tend to go together. They tend to run together. And there's a video posted almost a year ago on my channel where I obsessively went through the lines from ships on Google Maps, and looked at a few of these features and found some pretty disturbing commonalities.
Could you go into more detail about that? The lines on ships?
Well, so long story. The Google Maps is basically crisscrossed underneath the oceans with these lines that I began to see when I started looking and trying to find anomalies in the ocean bottom. And a lot of people
Right.
get tripped up by this because they're these straight lines arcing from all the ports and going to interesting features. And it turns out that they're actually the gravimetric scan lines of these
Yeah.
ships as they troll the ocean floor in order to actually see the bottom. That's how we see the bottom without robots going down there.
Right.
And sonar can be of some use, but actually, as it turns out, one of the best ways is to have an interferometer of some kind, and I think they're using atomic clocks to do it too. But
Yep.
they're able to scan the bottom. So what I started doing was looking to where there were these interesting ripples and fissures in the ocean floor, and that ships were coming from our major human ports and connecting to these areas in order to look at these more interesting features and study their fields and study the gravity of our planet and the material distribution of our planet. But then began to realize, and was already mapping these things, and what I was doing is taking that line and extending it all the way around the world. So it'd make a complete hemisphere of the world using that line, and see where they connected, right? From the major power points geologically on the Earth's surface, under the water and besides, and finding out that like it's actually a kind of four-dimensional map of human movement patterns settling in cities and where we do.
Okay.
And we create our stuff, and those things connecting with interesting geomagnetic hotspots on the surface of the planet, the most interesting like novel magnetic, and those also happen to be like islands and places of biological novelty as well.
I see.
Like Papua New Guinea has some of these most amazing fissures coming up from rippling up from the bottom of the ocean, but
right,
those minerals and that insane novelty. So connecting all of that, they cross in some places like Egypt, the Middle East, a lot around Papua New Guinea and these places, a lot going through Easter Island and Western South America, specifically through Peru, through these locations like Nazca, where the Paracas culture lived, which are all very highly crisscrossed by these. So it's just really interesting, and I don't know what to conclude from that.
Right.
I'm just literally one of these explorers making maps, and that's what I found. So I don't know if those are ley lines or just lines of a kind of map between multiple points, events in the fourth dimension.
Right. And when you say fourth dimension, typically I think of 3 dimensions of space and a fourth dimension of time.
Right.
How are you using that in this case?
In
are you talking about time
sense.
through humanity over the course
so
of
the time? Yeah, it's
Okay.
a map. Like so the way people settle in a given location is not like a settled thing that all of a sudden everybody decides they're gonna migrate to this given.
We're gonna hang out in Paris now.
Right. It's a slow settling process that has to do with tribal migrations over, and then that became people and speaking people and wars and migrations and all of it ends up with in these places people settle or not, and where that connects to geological and biological novelty was just really interesting to me.
Right. I see.
So that's what I mean by it. It might seem arbitrary the way that humans are settled across the globe, but it's really not. It's a function of lots of different circumstances, lots of dimensions interacting there. And
That's interesting.
In addition to the typical dimensions in space of time, anytime you take a measurement of a dynamic, and plot a numerical value based on it, you're dealing with a dimension of a sort. You've set up a dimension, and so when people talk about multidimensionality and string theory, especially, there's all these dimensions of space and time, but these are dimensions too. There's dimensions of understanding. There's dimensions. Temperature is a dimension.
Right.
Geological location. So there's we get really get in the weeds on that one. We can keep going on that one, but
well, it's similar to the way that the pyramid and there's a lot of things that it's hard to parse. There becomes a point where at first I'm like, okay, this could be coincidence, and then I start to learn more, and eventually I get to this point
too
where
many coincidences pile up.
It's too unlikely, I suppose. And even if, as this cliche has been said before, but even if 1% of that is accurate, that's a little startling.
Yeah,
right? And that's what keeps me going here, because there's a lot. That's that 1%.
Right, and it's probably more than 1%. But where Karl Popper came in, and this has to do with statistics too. Like where Karl Popper and some other ones came in, the big philosophers of the mid 20th century came in to define the nature of a paradigm, and when the paradigm shifts, what that entails. And basically, you have people doing procedural science, or there's a model, and then it sticks around for as long as it needs to until a certain number of anomalies pile up. And, at the point where you have enough anomalies, that constitutes an observation. And if you have a unique observation, there's a phenomenon, you're going to go chase that phenomenon. And
Right.
if that falls outside your model, you might have to update your model. And that's
Yeah.
where UFOs come in is one of the ultimate challenges to all the models. That's an
Right.
example where that's why it's not commonly dealt with by that community, because for a number of different reasons, but one of which is you shouldn't assume that you're the one doing the studying per se.
I was about to
And
say that, yeah.
it's a one-way street, right? You're dealing with intelligence possibly greater than your own. It's the same issue as AI alignment,
Right.
in a sense. Like, you're dealing with possible greater intelligence. You just can't assume that you're the one running the experiment. So
Yeah.
Galileo, I wish them luck. I hope they find things, but they're not gonna if whatever they're studying doesn't want that. Unless
Or
they
SETI, that same
catch
kind
it
of problem.
making a mistake.
Yeah.
Not that they're gods, but they certainly exhibit technological characteristics that we would consider godlike, right? In a way that you can see how the stories from our past may have been structured to express.
Right. Yeah. Diana Walsh Basolka, she's a religious studies professor.
Yeah, I'm familiar
and
with her.
yeah, that's something where, I kind of grew up in a Christian household, and I'm still sorting out what I believe on a day-to-day basis, right? But I've seen so many parallels now, especially the way that she points it out, where you do kind of start to wonder, how much are we not in control of this experiment ourselves?
Right.
How has this shifted your perspective on like religion and spirituality for yourself?
Well, I have a very unique spiritual upbringing. I was baptized Unitarian by my mom, and I've never really been a part of a serious mainstream religion, but was also raised by Sufi mystics and Native American spiritualists, and was a part of a lot of my mom did like an all-around I have to really hats off to my mom, did like an all-around exposure of all these different cultures, and even brought us to stay with our fundamentalist Christian aunt at one point to like see what
Right.
that was like, and experience that. Brought Mormons into our house so we could talk to them and like ask them questions, and was like, no, when they want to come back and baptize us, I'm like, nope. So I believe in the power of belief.
Right.
And more than that, like, I think that humans are insanely powerful, and that's why seems to be all these possibly like higher dimensional entities vying for
have an
absolute
interest.
devotion. Yeah, not have an interest in our future, but also in our us believing that they are all powerful and giving
Like an
them
egregore?
fealty.
Something
Yeah,
that becomes more powerful.
Egregore, exactly.
Yeah.
That's one word for it. And that belief can manifest into its own thing. And a lot of having done a little CE5 and having some of those experiences myself, can even begin to see how it's not like it's a weird thing to discover that there may exist aspects of the simulation, if you want to call it that defy typical explanation. You don't
Right.
want to just say you create your own reality, but to some degree, if we're in a simulation, digital simulation or quantum simulation, which is probably more likely, and that we're just in these nested, like the universe, the multiverse is a bunch of bubbles expanding, simulations within simulations, natural layers of the fractal, that there is a code, and to the extent that it is a simulation, there is a code. To the extent that there's code, we could break that code. That's the exciting piece, and that's what we might be experiencing. That's what I was trying to impart in my talk, which is that
Yep.
thinking in terms of just space and time of all these planets that you physically see in this space time as you see it out there with your telescopes is just a very small, such a insanely small piece of what may actually be happening, which is nested quantum information simulations and all of that weird jazz that all bets are off, and not even serious wacky physicists really want to go there because you start talking like a crazy person.
Right. Yeah, it becomes
it's
difficult
weird.
to have something to grasp onto that's testable.
Right.
That's the problem.
Exactly. And that's so when you need to, and that's, I actually think to some degree that's what's happening with schizophrenia. And
Right.
Perhaps somebody, like, this is a natural feature of consciousness, but it can go too far.
Yep.
That does so a lot. So you need to have certain rules to guide yourself by. And that's where, to some degree, religion comes in.
I was curious to get your perspective on, do you think that there are factions of humanity that have already mastered or at least begun to utilize, whether it be faster than light travel, and kind of part and parcel to that would be gravity manipulation?
It would seem so. It's hard to. We keep getting teased, right, by the intelligence community and all these whistleblowers coming out and saying that they had this or that data drop and then nothing happens. I've long lived with a sneaking suspicion and a strong feeling that that's the case. Yeah. And I can't say which ones exactly, like observed objects or whatever. I have some suspicion, but I can't say for certain.
Right.
I do. There's too much in the past, especially with T. Townsend Brown and other such characters, to think that there isn't some portion of the Defense Department budget, black budget, or USAPs or whatever that aren't working on this heavily. The few pieces of data we have about that say that what they say is already so much of what we can verify is already so extreme. You can imagine they're working on way bigger stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
I always come back to the way that I believe it was the SR-71, but I could be mistaken. It might be a different aircraft. Either way, it was retired for 14 years before it was actually admitted to have been flown. And so, we got to keep in perspective what is currently in flight that's not being acknowledged and won't be for another 20 years after its retirement.
Yeah.
Right?
A few of those programs, they didn't exist. The drone program for a long time didn't exist. What drone? There are no drones, but everybody was talking about the drones. So. They, but nonetheless, that program didn't exist for a long time, quote unquote.
Right.
So that, and that people say, well, how could they keep it that much of a secret? I'm not saying believe every crazy conspiracy theory that comes out of every alleged black vault, but the Manhattan Project happened, and that was thousands of people that were trained, to on a visceral level to not speak a word of what they were doing. And
still there were leaks. If people wanted to find them, they could find them. Russia found them, for example.
Yeah, very small leaks, but
but nothing
relatively
of any.
Right. The biggest folks make a slight mistake in surmising the biggest business of the United States government, which is, some think it's military projection, military power in a physical way. Now, it's control of information. That's what it does. The system is a complete domain control system, and that system is information. I think that it's totally feasible, probably rather likely that they have something, especially given what we know, the way that T. Townsend Brown was behaving toward the end of his career in public there. The wounded prairie chicken routine, as they call it, pretending to, in some ways, have nothing when he actually has the thing.
Right.
and that's for his own. I think it's on. It's been documented that there was a. I think it was on the Jesse Michaels video about it, but that there
Yep.
was a Russian working for the Kremlin that was revealed to be at one of his demos, and that freaked him out so much that he shut the lid on a lot of stuff, and seems to not have a handle on things when he actually had a complete handle on things.
Right.
And other similar things. And Tesla, what they know from the Tesla files, and that's just a couple of examples, let alone, T. Henry Moray and the guy that made the water-powered car, and all of the patents that have been sequestered over the years and taken to a secret vault somewhere in the U.S. archive, which is, national security related, that they could just say, oh, we got that, and take it, and you never see it. It never becomes technology,
Technology that we see. Yeah.
Right, and yeah, good point. It's not publicly known technology. It, somebody in there, or a group of people in there, sort of. So that pertains to, I think beyond that, there's definitely some group of people that, in addition to that physical technology we want to talk about, have sort of, you could call it access to, call it spiritual technology, mind control techniques, the levers of power and how they work, and deep esoteric knowledge about reality, the reality we all occupy, and how it really functions, like how it branches, how the human mind works. That's why it goes there. Like eventually it comes down to, we have to figure out this problem of consciousness and what life really means, what we're here for, what we're alive for, and what we're really involved with. Or these other things don't reveal themselves, both in a physical sense and in a technological sense, in a social sense. The anti-gravity, if you can control gravity, you could potentially wipe out the surface of the planet Earth. You could create a black hole that leads nowhere. You could literally destroy everything. So if there is any higher dimensional or ET thing operating, it may be operating for good reason to keep us from complete access to that technology, because we're just not mature enough. I mean, given right now what's happening on the surface of the planet, just the state of things, you can see how we've got a lot of growing to do.
Surely.
Right, like what would happen. I don't want to get political about any given thing, but we're being pretty atrocious to each other, and I wouldn't want those. Like, I would be worried about quarantine. I feel like we're on a quarantine, if anything. Like, I wouldn't want us getting out. Talk about a rash. Give the rest of the galaxy this hyper intense military industrial complex, but throw on it the power to black hole reactors and weaponry and warp drives and stuff. It's terrifying. It's absolutely shivering. It would be like the empire of Star Wars, but worse than Lucas could ever possibly imagine. I wouldn't wish that on any alien civilization,
right?
Especially given our track record. We think about aliens invading us and it going so wrong, but what if we did get that technology? I would fear for any indigenous civilization all throughout the cosmos.
Colony always occurs. It's happened in every point in history.
Yeah.
Right.
That game that's really popular, Helldivers, right? That's really drives that home.
I see.
So it's complex, but it's we live in unique times. That's for sure. We got a lot of decisions to make.
Yeah, man. I'm curious. So, you and I have been interested in these topics for a good while now, and I think perhaps are the outliers when you consider just everybody.
Hold on one second.
Oh, yeah.
I'm on this thing. I'll talk to you later. This is my bro.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I think we're probably outliers in terms of the general populace, in terms of thinking about these things maybe as much as we do.
Yeah.
So how can people? You've been doing this longer than I have. Like, how do you think that we can make a difference in this space in a positive way?
I think secretly everybody's weird and everybody's actually wants to be smart, except that we live in a culture that depresses that and makes it seem weird.
Okay.
I think actually it's really common to be curious.
Yeah.
And people are getting more and more curious. Like, look at the podcast scene and like Joe Rogan and stuff. Like, some of the stuff he talks about is far out there. But apparently there's this huge appetite for alternate history and,
It's true. Yeah.
and UFO shit. There's just the popularity of the even whether or not, you know, I'm a Bob Lazar fan still. Like the documentary that he did with Jeremy Corbell and the popularity that received was just insane. Shows that, and just UFOs, you know, we've had the preponderance with UFOs for a long time. That goes back to the early 2000s, maybe even the 90s. Most people believe that UFOs exist and the aliens might be visiting us. That, you know, just that, if that most extreme thing and that most people believe something's going on there, I think that it says we're more common than we'd like to think. It's just a matter of whether do we want to make these conversations and these kind of conversations more of a thing that happens more. And I would enjoy that, and it's doing this and having these kinds of conversations and having them more regularly, and doing them in a way that is relatable to people, that the layman can join in and be like, you know, say the maybe most relatively uninformed thing and be like, is it like this? But not just shooting him down, but like bringing him in it.
Totally.
And I style myself an intellectual. As a quote unquote intellectual from my life, I've been really off put by other intellectuals and the way they act toward each other and just people can be really immature when we're discussing things. Sorry.
All good.
Getting really intense about our pet topics and getting lost in the sauce and repelling the norms, like scaring the straights guys, and that we can be civil and have polite, well-reasoned, open-hearted, open-minded conversation about stuff and show people that that's actually really cool and can be really fun.
Yeah.
And make that the new normal. Like, I think that's where things are coming around to. The internet's helping with that. It's really accelerated, I think, since the pandemic. That really made a lot of people look at,
Totally.
for better or worse, it made a lot of people look at their lives and what was really mattered. And all of these science podcasts boomed, and like the most common, you just find normal, quote unquote, normal people popping up in the woodwork everywhere, saw a UFO or had an odd experience, and they're hitting up the physics YouTube to try and explain some experience they had with consciousness or with UFOs or now with AI, and wondering things. And I just encourage that wonderment. I hope your conversation with Charles Bueller really inspired me, because I would like to see more of that kind of thing with experienced and practiced scientists just opening up to the general public, and there being a dialogue a bit between the quote unquote smartest people and the and the rest
everybody else.
Everybody else. And I don't even like that word smart. It's always bothered me. It's like almost like, it's a compliment they give you, but it's like, I feel like a wall is put up there. It's a label. It's like somebody might be like, I'm not like that. I'm not that thing. I'm telling you, you are, so that I don't have to feel like I have to try to be like you. I can just be me. And then I'm like, that's okay. But I feel like the decision to stay ignorant about some things when other data is presented, that's not, I don't prefer that. So being called smart isn't really helpful. I like to have everybody just be curious, and it's incuriosity that bugs me the most. You know, and my kids or with anybody, like, why wouldn't you want to know what that crazy friggin' thing is that you just saw in the sky? You know, some people just turn off. They don't even want to talk about it, even if they did see something. They don't want to know what it was, and they just, boom, flush it out of their mind. They don't want to deal with it. It's too big. And I'm like, that concept of something being too big, that drives me crazy, because like the biggest mysteries. So yeah, I guess we're in a special category that way. But I would hope that we're just, you know, an example of where all humanity is eventually going. I would hope with more technology we get smarter. There's that word again. Not, you know, we get more curious, not less.
Right.
So that's why I'm optimistic. You know, how any ideas that you have for how to make a bigger impact with these conversations?
I think that I have one of my stumbling blocks is that I kind of an ideologue in some ways, so I don't necessarily focus on the potential negative aspects of this kind of disclosure, as you've stated. Right. You know, I interviewed Phil Bouchard about a week ago, and he told me at the end, I asked him if he was optimistic, and he has a theory that, you know, he feels like he can basically do gravity control, do teleportation, right? He has all this stuff that he feels like his theory explains, and whether or not that is correct or not is, I'm not really educated enough to make that kind of a determination. But what was interesting to me was that he said, look, with my theory, it's way easier to like blow up the planet, basically. It's way easier to have destructive outcomes. But I'm not interested in that, because what I'm interested in is the challenging parts of how we can do this in a positive way, right?
Right.
And so that kind of gave me some pause, because I had to realize, okay, that is obviously correct. And, you know, how do I sift that? So for me, I still kind of feel like, as you said at the very beginning here, things are darkest before the dawn, in a way where, you know, the darkest moments in my life, the loss of family members, for example, are the things that have spurred me to talk to people like yourself and to do these kinds of things and to take advantage of the time that we have. And so I hope that maybe because we are at such a broiling point as a society, maybe that can be the catalyst that we need to get beyond some of this petty behavior in a way. But I'm also optimistic about those kinds of things. So
survival is a powerful motivator as well.
Yes.
When the chips are really down. Unless you see despair as a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's interesting. I think that technologically speaking, you know, we've had the technology to make a better life for humanity for a long time. It's more of a social thing. We have to want to improve ourselves. And get over the strange addictions that are sort of like, at this point, kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy of just patterns that we're living through, because that's what everybody was always living through. And the way things have been so far, and what we have to avoid is to try and avoid the way things have been thus far, setting the tone and setting the precedent for the rest of the way that history unfolds, even with all these opportunities. So not taking something with great promise like a warp drive and using it to blow up the world, for example, or making a warp bomb, like that's the first thing they do with the technology when they get it. You know, turn the swords into plowshares, so to speak. I sort of, you know, I'm selfishly optimistic because I have to be. You know, I have this many. You know, I think that it's like there's a meme that was going around, and the person is planting flowers, and the person's like, how do you think, you know, how do you think the next year's going to turn out? How do you think the future's going to turn out? He's like, well, I think there's going to be flowers. So why do you think that? Well, because I'm planting flowers. Like, what do I think about the future? I think there will be trees. Why? Because I'm planting trees. All of these things could go up in an instant, but there's something about planting trees whose shade you'll never sit in. And that's what we're doing right now too with this
Yeah.
talk about technology. There, for the others that have come before us, Townsend Brown and all these others, Einstein and the ones that came before us, we discussed this long-term project that
Yep.
could take centuries before we see anything real come of it for humanity. We may have more things to go. If Star Trek is any indicator, they didn't just get the warp drives just like that. They went through a couple hundred years of absolute crap, hell on earth,
Right.
before somebody finally figured it out. And humanity had to get sick of killing themselves and each other, and desirous of a different way.
Yep.
And then they were able to do the spacefaring future. You look at ants. You know, we don't like the idea that we might end up like, mindless hive mind. But in terms of efficiency and social cohesion, that's the most, advanced structure we can find in nature socially, is like a eusocial organism. And you talk about possible ETs having hive minds that are connected. Why they might be interested in this time right now is, we might be looking at the last time when humans were individuated,
Wow, actually, yeah.
as we know it, right? That's before we all put technology in our bodies with Neuralink and everything else,
Yeah,
and start
damn.
connecting. This is possibly the last generation that has, it might be gone already with social media.
Yeah,
There's
just targeted ads.
There's no innocent innocence doesn't come back once it's lost, right?
Yep.
And to some extent, we've already lost our innocence. We're already slightly hive-like.
I think we just have to tend to our little garden. That's all
Yeah.
we can do.
And seeing the global to local, acting
Yeah.
thinking globally, acting locally. It sounds cliche, it sounds like Disney stuff. But it's real,
Yep.
We can keep tending it, and I'm a gardener, so I know
Yeah.
it's, and why to use that metaphor, I garden because I can't not garden.
Yeah.
In the middle of winter, that's where these started from. In the middle of winter, I wanted some greenery to look at,
Right.
so I started putting plants in jars and looking at this, so that I would have something to prick up my spirits and something to do with my hands, with nature and stuff, even in the middle of winter, which can be pretty gnarly here. And like we
Right.
get seasonal affective disorder. Same thing with we're kind of in the human winter right now, and maybe it's just not spring yet. And
That's
we're
lovely.
seeing the first sprigs of spring in the ideas we're talking about. Humanity finally figuring it out, but philosophy is important, so important. Ethics are so important. It gets lost in technological talk too, but social technologies are also technologies, and
Right.
they don't want you to talk about that stuff. Society, try and recreate like the corporate system as it exists, or try to find a new way to do business. I'm taking business right now. I'm a business major, but that's because I'm trying to figure out a way to do business that like benefits myself and others.
Yeah.
This regenerative business might be, ironically, a really powerful way to improve the planet. Like just to have a more just world, with functioning, like ecological functioning. I think it might be better for the kids to have a world that's covered in apple trees and where the rain returns on a reliable basis, because you've made your berms and swales and built biomatter and made it so the land sequesters more water, more carbon, and you can have your cake and eat it too. And then you're not sacrificing anything in terms of your human
Right.
needs either, because you're talking about fostering abundance and food and nature and having animals around and plants around. And I think that's what if we want to, I probably have to get to making dinner soon, but if you want to,
Yeah.
talk about other times, where if you study mythology, like indigenous mythology or Eastern mythology, there's other times when there were brilliant beings coming and going, ETs, if you want to call them that.
Sure.
Watchers in the book in the Bible and stuff like that, whatever names you want to give them, where they all have stories of human beings living in harmony with nature and also with the heavens, and all those things go together. I think that's for a reason, because there's been other times, call them gold ages or whatever, where humans were of a higher, more enlightened state, or at least because they didn't have this aggressive relationship with nature, they were able to connect to forces or energies that are typically hidden from us. And
Right.
there's stories like in the Sidhe of Ireland and the fairy folk and the Wanjinas from the Australian Aborigines, and all of these, we have this rich tradition of describing a more wholesome people living in ways that we call it primitive now with our technology. They just had a different kind of technology, and the technology was mental. And they didn't think in terms of, like, sure, maybe human longevity was maybe not as long, but they thought in terms of the value of a human experience and the life that presented. And if you have, a more impactful life, even that shorter life would be, have more meaning for you. So it's like the way you perceive time might have 100% more value. They might understand something more about the soul and reincarnation possibly, or consciousness itself, and the real meaning of, rather than having this really long life extended artificially through technology that's devoid of meaning, they had this
Yeah.
much more meaningful connection to nature and reality, that it featured all that and then some, regular connections with spirit beings and ET beings, and a meaningful experience of being alive, human and alive, which a lot of folks overlook, and really breaks my heart when people say, humans are innately bad, or
Not at all. Yeah.
yeah, they were actually really amazing creatures that are, of course, interesting. Some people with the ET thing, like, well, why would they want to come visit us? Like, have you seen us, bro? Not to toot our own horn, but we're pretty interesting beings.
Sure. Yeah, if we like to study ants, as Joe Rogan said, I think, then people are going to be studying us, or things would be.
Yeah, that's exactly what this folks say. Like, you sooner have a conversation with an ant. Bro, have you seen David Attenborough's special on the ant kingdoms and ants Canada? And people love ants. Like, myrmecology is fascinating.
It's a beautiful picture, and definitely, I think, what we can strive for. If more people have this perspective, I think we're on the right track at the end of the day. And there's probably no better way for us to wrap this up together.
And nobody's
right?
perfect, too.
Yeah.
It's like, we're all struggling and help each other out, and we're all in this bus together.
Absolutely.
We can take it off the falls, or we can turn it around.
Paddle up shore.
Yeah, paddle up shore rapidly and together.
Yeah.
Or,
sequence.
build a spaceship and just take off the other way running. I don't know.
Let's leave the river, maybe. That's what we need to do.
That's one part of it.
Yeah.
I vote all of the above.
Right.
Fix the ecology problems, build, Martian bases, do warp drive, all of it.
Killer.
And
I agree. That's great. Yeah.
The other, in my research for the presentation on interstellar travel, one of the biggest groups that's approaching that issue is like, we're not going to get off easy. We have to fix these problems, because the horizon for doing an interstellar mission is going to take so long. And even if you did and you got there, would you want to say, yeah, we were the guys that just killed our home planet.
We just left. Sorry.
We just left a big pile of trash. Hey, can we shack up in your neighborhood for a second? And any decent civilization worth its salt would be like, no, try the next one over.
Get the plank in your eye first.
Right. Well, man, thanks for hosting me, and I appreciate
you.
Your time, and I'm glad to do another one of these anytime, and maybe I could interview you on my channel.
I'd love that. Yeah, it's a pleasure talking with anybody who is, thinking about this kind of stuff. I'm always
for sure
always grateful.
And for sure. Have a good day.
Oh, hey, you're still here? Well, thanks for watching this far. I really appreciate you doing so. Maybe consider subscribing to the show. Also, leave me a comment in the description below with what you found most interesting about this video, or just make fun of me. That's great too. Either way, if you have a guest that you think would be good for the show, there's a contact in the description of this video. I look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you.